Amen. So the purpose of forgiveness is to restore yourself and someone who is aggressive towards you or transgressive towards you into full relationship with each other. Literally, it is meant to restore full relationship with each other, with God, and reality. If someone is hurting you and has no intention of stopping it or does not recognize what's going on, forgiveness is literally impossible. During this series, we've been looking at the process of forgiveness and how it's accomplished and what its ends are. Last week, we reflected on that process using what we called the 4 R's, that forgiveness is really is a fourfold process. It involves a rebuke or some form of the person being harmed, pointing out, hey, there's a problem here in some way. It then involves the other person recognizing there's a problem, turning, changing their way of thinking. The word is repent in the Christian tradition. And then on the part of the one who has been harmed, there is that revocation of debt. That's the true forgiveness. Before actually that person's been able to restore the relationship, work on to make amends, forgiveness is offered so that with grace and blessing, they may work without impediment to restoring the relationship to its fullness. Both of you can work on that. We found that without those 4 things going on, if you take out one of those pieces, well, then forgiveness is kind of like trying to herd cattle into a corral with only 3 sides of the fence. You can put a lot of time and effort and energy into it, but it can be completely wasted. This morning, we're looking at those times when maybe there's been a rebuke, maybe you've pointed out something's an issue, but there is no turning on the other person. Those times when forgiveness literally can't happen. Perhaps the aggressor or transgressor doesn't even recognize the problem, or perhaps they do but still have no intention of stopping the infliction of harm. Or perhaps they're simply out of your life now. They've moved away or they're dead. There's no way to then work on the relationship. The Christian tradition actually says the solution is not forgive and forget. The solution is to turn to a couple of what you could call forgiveness's kissing cousins. Do a couple of things that are often mistaken for forgiveness, but are qualitatively different. They're meant for situations just like this. And for those of you who are graduating seniors this morning, I'm certainly you've found already many times in your life where you have experienced aggression by someone and there has been no turning. It only gets tougher as you get older to work on forgiveness, unless the principles are you've laid a good foundation. If you actually have a foundation in the principles, it gets easier to forgive as you get older. But if you have no comprehension of those foundations, it actually gets harder, mostly because the things we call forgiveness are so messy in today's world. Many things actually aren't about forgiveness, but something else. They're the kissing cousins. So when I think about those 2 kissing cousins, well, first of all, when Bruce Van Blair thinks about it, he's written about this. Some of you are following his writings during this series. He calls the 2 kissing cousins of forgiveness, he makes up names for them. For harm not, that's for harm not, that's in stopping the harm, and for healing. I have a terrible time remembering those 2 terms, mostly because over the years I've developed other terminology, so I remember my own. And so this morning I'll name those 2 kissing cousins in my own way. I call them the 2 Ks. We learned the 4 Rs. There's the 2 Ks of alternatives to forgiveness. And they are compassion and kindness. Okay, so that doesn't quite work, but compassion sounds like it starts with a K, doesn't it? All right. All right, if that's not so neat, well, maybe you can think of the mnemonic might be, think of Calvin Klein. There we go. Compassion and kindness. Every time you see a Calvin Klein label now, think of compassion and kindness. They're the kissing cousins of forgiveness. Okay, this is what you employ when true forgiveness is not possible. Now, that may just sound easy. You'll just be compassionate, be kind. Well, there's a little more to it than that. There always is. Jesus actually gives us a couple of these lessons about how we do this in this morning's reading. Let's hear from Matthew 5, verses 39 through 47, an excerpt from his famous Sermon on the Mount.
But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you or take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same?
In my experience, us Christians have a really hard time remembering those words, much less accepting them. I mean, do you get kind of the offense of it? It's like Jesus is saying, do not resist an evil one, for instance. Any of us who have ever joined the church using the membership liturgy, one of the vows we make is to resist evil. So we actually ask our new members to break transgress Jesus' own words. He says, do not resist an evil one. And then he says that if you're just simply offering kindness to those who are kind to you and love only those who love you, well, that may make you an average pagan or tax collector, but not a Christian. Wow. I mean, I thought that was just it. I mean, we love people in exchange for love, and Jesus says, hey, you're an average pagan if you do that. No, what makes you a Christian is when you love someone who does not love you. When you pray for those who persecute you. When you respond with the energies of kindness to those who are unkind to you. Then that's the mark of a true Christian. Hard words to accept, hard words to remember. What Jesus is essentially saying is you can't fight fire with fire. You can't simply solve the problem of evil by being evil yourself. And that becomes even more clear when we think about the categories we've been working within during this series of reality versus non-reality. If we're going to strip away kind of the moralistic overtones of forgiveness and repentance and so forth, and just kind of look at the base reality of the situation, you have reality on one hand, you have non-reality on the other. If God is the author of reality and God is love, then reality, getting real, is to get loving. If you're not loving, you are actually less real as a human being. You exist less. Your existence becomes thinner and thinner the less and less loving you are. And so it's painful when you feel like your whole existence is getting thinner. It causes pain. Existential pain, literally, is the term. Existential, having to do with our existence. That deep gnawing in us that something is just not right with the world, ourselves, our lives. That pain mechanism is meant for our protection. It's God's protection mechanism, not God's punishment. Much as the pain mechanisms in the human body are meant to protect us from harm, not cause the harm itself. So when you put your hand on a hot stove, there's the protection mechanism that allows you to pull that away rather than keeping it on the stove. So it's helpful to keep in mind that when someone harms you, move away from love, they move away from reality, and moving away from reality is painful, existentially painful, whether they reflect that in their actions or not. They are experiencing pain, absolutely, whether they want to experience that pain or not. And of course, they don't want to experience that. But it's really happening beneath the surface. So as much as you may want to, have every right to, in fact, hit someone for hitting you, extract an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, be as evil towards the person as they are to you, what's helpful to recognize is that what you are doing then is adding to pain which is already being experienced. And in fact, in being unloving and unkind, you yourselves we ourselves moved into non-reality, into pain ourselves. My father, when I was in high school, taught me a phrase which I initially resented because he was trying to correct me, but I have remembered throughout my life, and it applies to many situations, but this one in particular. He said, "Eric, just always remember Johnny was right, dead right, but now he's as dead as he was right." Now, he applied that to me when I was trying to rush through a yellow light and said, I am right. It's legal to do that. But it also applies in terms of this scale here. We may want to hurt someone, and we may have the right to do so because we have been wronged. But sometimes in doing so, we end up harming ourselves in the process through our response. So compassion is what helps us respond differently. If we're going to remind ourselves that reality is love, then the way that we actually work towards healing in our own lives when someone has wronged us is to move more strongly towards love, to find some way to do that. Now, it may involve the other person, it may not. It kind of depends on how they're responding. But ultimately, to recognize, to draw in compassion helps us look at the other person with different eyes and respond, therefore, differently in a way that moves us towards love rather than away from it. The root word of love comes from the Latin, compati. That means to suffer with. To suffer with. In Hebrew, it's very much the same. The word that we translate as compassion in the Old Testament, rachamim, literally means to be womb-ish. Womb-ish. That is, to feel the experience of someone else as if it is your own experience. In the gut. Viscerally. That their experience, you take that into yourself and experience it as they do. When we develop this sense of suffering with or compassion towards another, we begin to realize more and more the pain that they are causing themselves that is far deeper than the pain that they are causing another person, because they are moving into non-reality where you have not moved at all. Now, if you doubt, if you have had experiences in your life when someone has caused you to suffer and seems to have no regret whatsoever about it, and you think that explains the whole of the situation, well, consider the story of George Saunders. Now, this morning we have a few high school graduates in our midst, and you're going to be receiving a gift. I hate to give away the surprise, but you're receiving, in book form, a commencement address by the author George Saunders, which he gave to students at Syracuse University last year. That address was so wildly popular that as soon as it was posted on the internet, within a week, it had over 1 million shares. It's now been shared with millions and millions of people. What would cause so many people to react so viscerally to Saunders' words? Well, he reflected on regret. He looked over his life and he said, I have certain regrets, but none of them match up to one particular regret, which he spoke of. But he started listing some of the other regrets that were lower on the scale. He said, I regret there were times in my life where I was really in deep poverty, and I wish that didn't happen. He said, I also regret some terrible jobs I had, like knuckle puller in a slaughterhouse. He said, I regret when I went skinny dipping in a river in Sumatra and I contracted a disease that laid me low for 7 months. And I regret times in my life when I've suffered some pretty deep humiliation. He said that there's one thing, though, that outweighs all those easily, that I have not stopped regretting for 42 years. This is an excerpt from Saunders' story.
I'd say, as a goal in life, you could do worse than try to be kinder. In 7th grade, this new kid joined our class. In the interest of confidentiality, her name will be Ellen. Ellen was small, shy. She wore these blue cat's-eye glasses that at the time only old ladies wore. When nervous, which was pretty much always, she had a habit of taking a strand of hair into her mouth and chewing on it. So she came to our school and our neighborhood and was mostly ignored, occasionally teased, "Your hair tastes good," that sort of thing. I could see this hurt her. I still remember the way she'd look after such an insult. Eyes cast down, a little gut kicked, as if, having just been reminded of her place in things, she was trying as much as possible to disappear. After a while, she'd drift away, hair strands still in her mouth. Sometimes I'd see her hanging around alone in her front yard as if afraid to leave it. And then she moved. That was it. One day she was there, next day she wasn't. End of story. Now, why do I regret that? Why, 42 years later, am I still thinking about it? Relative to most of the other kids, I was actually pretty nice to her. I never said an unkind word to her. In fact, I sometimes even mildly defended her. But still, it bothers me. What I regret most in my life are failures of kindness. Those moments when another human being was there in front of me, suffering, and I responded sensibly, reservedly, mildly. Or to look at it from the other end of the telescope, who in your life do you remember most fondly, with the most undeniable feelings of warmth? Those who were kindest to you, I bet. But kindness, it turns out, is hard. It starts out all rainbows and puppy dogs and expands to include, well, everything.
I wonder how that story would have been different if Ellen would have punched in the face every person who offered her an unkind word. We can't know the motivations of her refusal to do just that, whether she was simply afraid and cowering, or whether because she had a sense of compassion which led her to realize that those who were hurting her were actually experiencing this kind of irrevocable, unavoidable pain that she actually was worse than what she was experiencing. But what we can know is that her refusal to fight fire with fire stands as the sharpest rebuke of that hurtful behavior that she could make. And in fact, continued to affect people for years and years. Saunders, of course. But the fact that so many millions of people have shared his story around the world tells us there's probably a few more than just George Saunders having such regrets for withholding or a kindness or causing harm. When you think back about to your own high school experience, those of you who are a little older than these folks, you think about the high school bullies. How many went on to become terrorists and criminals versus just normal people? And when you become a normal feeling person, this is exactly what you begin to realize is those regrets for withholding kindness. If you do not feel them, well, there is a class of people who don't feel such regrets. They're called sociopaths. They're the people who, in a sense, can put their hand on a hot stove and just, it's been burned so long they no longer feel anything. That's even worse. I know something personally about bullying and responding to that because I myself was bullied a fair amount as a young child. You may find it hard to believe, but I was a little overweight as a child. I had man breasts. I grew like a weed really fast, and so I stuck out like a sore thumb, but I was also very uncomfortable in my own body, having grown so fast. I was clumsy. And we moved 3 times during elementary school, so I was always the new kid on the block, who bullies always love to single out for special attention. Consequently, I have my share of flack. What kept me from becoming a criminal sociopath myself was, in response, was really an intuition. I didn't have the language for it at the time, but it was an intuition that those who were hurting me were hurting worse themselves. I realized I would actually rather be me than them. Their approach towards life seemed completely distasteful to me and problematic, and would naturally lead to a kind of inner harm. And inner harm is terrible because it's self-inflicted. You actually do it out of your own will. I'm going to stab myself in the stomach. Yeah! I mean, that's what it's like. Now, so mostly I looked at my aggressors with that sense of compassion, and it changed my activities. Now, I will say on the 2 occasions when I actually did raise my fists in the face of aggression, my intent even then was not to do harm to the bully. It was actually to force friendship. In fact, in one situation, I actually accomplished that. I got the bully in a stranglehold and refused to let up until he promised to be my friend. You laugh, but it worked. I was in grade school. We were friends all the way through high school, and then we just kind of lost touch with each other. That was it. The other one, well, we never became friends, but we did have a mutual respect for one another. There was no more harm done either way, and I could live my life without that. Now, the other day, I was out at the Gifford Farm at the Fontenelle Forest down in Bellevue. Have you ever been out there? It's a wonderful place. A lot of kids go there to learn, farming things, I guess. But they have a lot of walking trails for the rest of us throughout the marshlands and through the hills and the forest. Some great historic sites. You can see where the Mormons crossed the Missouri River and so forth. It's a great place with miles of trails. I like to go out there regularly, and I especially have fond of doing that on Friday mornings early as I'm reflecting on my sermon. And so this Friday morning, it was great because the sun was out, and oh my gosh, the birds were just going crazy. They were just having a good old time. I saw Canada geese, I saw ducks and regular ducks, wood ducks, some finches and swallows, and I'm not a birder, so I can't go on naming all these birds I saw, but just tons of birds. They were just having a great old time. Great old time until I drew near them on the trail. And then things suddenly changed for a number of them. I came across, for instance, a red-winged blackbird who apparently I got a little close to its nest hidden in the reeds, and so it flew up into a tree right in front of me and sounded like this. It was cussing me out. It was as if it was saying, "Hey, you idiot, get away from here. This is not your place. If you're going to mess with my nest, I'm going to open a can of wampum on you, and we'll learn who's boss here." I mean, it was just continued to just heave abuse upon abuse at me, puffing itself up, and I stopped, and I just had to chuckle and pause, which it didn't seem to appreciate either. As this whole scenario was transpiring, and I scared like 57 birds before I lost interest in counting on my little trip through the forest, like flying flocks of ducks and so forth. But as this whole scenario was transpiring, it dawned on me that this little interaction between myself and the red-winged blackbird really stood for a whole lot of human interactions with each other. There's a saying that we see things not as they are, but as we are. We see things not as they are, but as we are. That red-winged blackbird saw the situation. Its reaction was more a reflection of who it was, what it was, not the reality of the situation. In no way did I walk on that path with the intention to disturb its nest. And in fact, given the opportunity, I would not only preserve that nest if I saw it, but I would protect it and even defend it if necessary. I had no intention of doing it any harm. And yet, through its eyes, I was hell-bent on destroying what it considered sacred. its own. Now, suppose I'd taken offense at that blackbird. Suppose I hadn't kind of been able to have the compassionate look and see, kind of feel its world and understand where it was coming from, realize it had nothing to do with my world. What if I'd taken offense, taken a slingshot out of my pocket, said, "Oh, you want to mess with me? I'll mess with you, and we'll take care of that." I mean, how absurd would that be? Oh, don't worry, it's not dead. It's just pining for the fields. Okay, not too many Monty Python fans. Sorry, never mind. But it would just be absurd for me to do that. It would be a completely inappropriate response. It would move me now into non-reality and the bird out of reality altogether. But I really wonder about human interactions with each other when it's not just birds and people, but people upon people. This bird was a glorious thing of God. It may have perceived me as infringing upon what it considered sacred, but I actually considered sacred what it considered sacred. So it had a misapprehension of reality, and it caused it to act aggressively towards me. But it was clear to me that this bird, even in its act of aggression, was a beautiful, beautiful creation of God, a wondrous creation of God, something that makes the world beautiful and worth living in. And sometimes I get the feeling that probably about 90% of our reactions towards each other, when we either someone inflicts harm upon us or when we inflict harm upon another, it's kind of like that, where one side perceives that the other side is endangering something they both actually hold sacred, but in the perception of the one, the other is destroying it. We never act with full information in life. We can't read each other's minds. So all we can see is their external actions. And when someone acts in one way, we then fill in the gap in our knowledge with what? With stuff that comes from within us. And sometimes we fill in that gap, that what we use to fill that gap reflects more who we are than who they are. No. When we begin to see that the other people who are aggressive towards us are beautiful children of God, and that 90% of the actions that they make towards us tend to be from misconstruing something the perception that we are infringing upon something they held sacred that we most likely would hold sacred too, but we have a different perception of what's going on. Well, that allows us to respond to the situation not simply with the energies of compassion, but with the second kissing cousin of forgiveness. That is, with kindness. Kindness. Sometimes when we respond to an aggressor with kindness, the aggressor actually wakes up. They're not expecting kindness. They have pasted us as evil. But when we respond from kindness, it's enough to wake them up to something they hadn't woken up to before. They actually do a turning, a changing of a whole way of thinking, a repentance in the classic language. And then forgiveness actually becomes possible where it wasn't before. Other times you can respond with kindness and you're not going to get kindness back. You'll get kicked in the teeth. But in that case, you respond with kindness for your own healing, not the other person's. And if kindness puts you in danger, then you simply have to leave that person alone and go respond with use your energies of kindness in other ways so that you yourself can simply release that situation, leave it behind you, and go on your way. You take your walk through the woods. No matter how much squawking comes up, you realize I'm walking through this woods. This is a glorious experience for me. It's too bad it's not a glorious experience for the other people. And you go on your way. I have a hunch that in eternity, meaning in this life and into the next, whatever the next may hold for us, that in the perspective of eternity, we will all learn to see reality, see other people for who they are rather than through who we are. And that when we see people for who they really are, we will see something glorious. We will see far more glory than we ever had any conception of. You get a hint of this at people's funerals, don't we? When somebody has died and all the kind of the baggage kind of goes away, and we realize, oh my God, there was this glorious being in our midst. I wish I would have appreciated that more. I think in eternity, when all that pain and suffering is left behind, we will see us all from that perspective, like the red-winged blackbirds. You see it in all its glory, not simply in its little bits. Not simply through the way it says it may come after us. And when we do, I have a hunch that we will then more and more respond with the energies to our differences, if there are differences in eternity, through the energies of compassion, of kindness. Perhaps even if we can get the whole picture, forgiveness will come more easily and more easily. And then in eternity, we'll realize that compassion and kindness and forgiveness are the only reality worth living for. And perhaps if it works that way in eternity, it also works that way in the here and now. May it be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.